mean I'll see it.
You know how people always talk about those weird things kids say? Those moments where they look at you with those wide, unblinking eyes and say something that makes the hair on your arms stand up? I used to think it was just their brains misfiring, trying to make sense of a world they don't understand yet. But what my son, Leo, told me yesterday, it's been rotting in my head ever since. I can't unhear it. I can't unsee the look on his face when he described it. Leo is 4 now. He's at that age where he's finally getting a real handle on language, and he's usually a pretty happy kid. But we were sitting in the living room, just watching the rain hammer against the glass. It was one of those storms where the sky turns a bruised, sickly purple color. Leo was staring out the window, totally motionless, and then he just turned to me and said that he remembered that night. I asked him what night he meant, thinking he was talking about a trip to the zoo or something. He didn't blink. He just said he remembered being outside in the rain before he was him. He told me he was standing right there on the other side of the glass, looking into the kitchen. He said it was cold, so cold that he felt like his skin was cracking like dry mud. He described seeing me and his dad sitting on the kitchen floor. He said we were holding each other and that the floor was covered in red. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it physically curdled in my chest. He shouldn't know about that. Nobody should. Years before Leo was even a thought, I went through something that I've spent every waking hour trying to bury. It was a late-term miscarriage. I won't get too graphic, but it wasn't a hospital thing. It happened at home, suddenly, in the middle of a storm just like this one. It was a massacre. The pain was one thing, but the sight of it, the sheer amount of blood that a body can hold, splashing across white linoleum, is something that changes the way you look at the world. My husband found me in the kitchen, and we broke. We collapsed right there on the floor, surrounded by the physical evidence of our grief, just sobbing into each other's necks while the thunder shook the foundation of the house. We never told Leo. We never even told our families the full details. To everyone else, it was just a medical complication. But Leo started going into more detail. He said he stood there in the pouring rain, watching us cry. He said he felt so bad for us, that he decided he wanted to help. He told me he walked up to the back door and knocked. He said he knocked and knocked, but we were too loud, too busy screaming at the ceiling to hear him. He said his knuckles were bleeding from hitting the wood so hard. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. I remembered that night vividly, and I remembered my husband, Mark, suddenly freezing in the middle of his sobbing. He had looked toward the back door, his face pale and streaked with tears. He had stood up, shaking, and walked over to the door. He opened it, expecting to find, I don't know what. A neighbor? Help? But there was nothing there. Just the wind and the sheets of rain. He came back to the floor and told me he thought he heard someone knocking. I told him it was just the storm. I couldn't get you to hear me, Leo whispered, still staring at me with those vacant, dark eyes. So I just walked through. I didn't use the door. I just slipped through the cracks in the glass. I walked over to you on the floor, Mommy. I had to step over the other one. That's when the room started to spin. I asked him what he meant by the other one. Leo tilted his head, a small, sad smile touching his lips. He said there was something else on the floor with us. Something small and wet that wasn't moving. He told me he reached down and touched it, and it felt like cold lunch meat. He said it was broken, and since it couldn't be our baby anymore, he decided he would just take its place. He told me he crawled right inside me while I was crying, pushing the broken pieces out of the way to make room for himself. I wanted to throw up. I could almost feel it, a phantom sensation of something cold and wet sliding into my gut, replacing the life I had just lost. The way he described it, it wasn't sweet. It wasn't some beautiful story of reincarnation. It sounded like a home invasion. It sounded like something predatory that had seen an opening in our shared agony and forced itself in. He told me he had to eat the sadness to grow. He said that for the first few months in my belly, he tasted nothing but the copper of the blood and the salt of my tears. He said he liked the taste. It made him feel strong. Ever since that conversation, I can't look at him the same way. I watch him while he's sleeping, and I wonder what exactly is behind those eyelids. Is it my son? Or is it just something that saw two broken people on a kitchen floor and decided to wear our grief? Like a costume? Mark has been acting different, too. I told him what Leo said, and he hasn't been able to be in the same room as the boy for more than 10 minutes. He just stares at the back door, the one he opened that night. He told me he started having these dreams, well, nightmares, where he opens the door and sees a small, gray figure standing in the rain. But in the dream, the figure doesn't have a face. It just has a mouth, and it's wide open, waiting for someone to let it in. The worst part is the smell. Lately, whenever it rains, Leo's room starts to smell like old, stagnant water. Like a pond that's been sitting under the sun for too long. And sometimes, when I pass his door at night, I hear a sound. It's not a voice. It's a rhythmic thudding. Knock. 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 It's coming from the inside of his bedroom door. Like he's trying to remind me that he's still here. Like he's reminding me that he's the one who stayed, even though he had to climb over a corpse to do it. Last night, I went in to check on him because the knocking wouldn't stop. He was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a perfect, rhythmic motion. But his knuckles, his tiny, 4-year-old knuckles were raw and red, the skin split open as if he had been punching a brick wall for hours. There was a faint smear of blood on the white paint of the door, right at the height of his hand. I stood there in the dark, listening to the rain hit the roof, and I realized that I don't know who or what is living in my house. I keep thinking about what he said, about pushing the broken pieces out of the way. I find myself wondering if those pieces are truly gone, or if they're still there, buried deep inside him, screaming to get out. I don't think I'll ever feel safe in the rain again. Every time the thunder rolls, I look at my son and I see that gray thing standing outside the glass, waiting for the moment we break again. Because now I know it doesn't need an invitation. It just needs a crack. And once it's in, you can never, ever get it out. The smell of the rain never really left the kitchen after that night. It just changed. It went from that fresh, metallic scent of a storm to something heavier, something that smelled like wet wool and old meat. My husband, Mark, has become a ghost in his own home. He doesn't go into the kitchen anymore. He eats his meals standing up in the living room, staring at the back door with a look of absolute, gut-shredding terror. He told me that every time he looks at the linoleum, he sees the stains, even though I scrubbed them until my fingernails bled years ago. Leo has stopped talking about the night he arrived, but his behavior has shifted into something much worse. He's become obsessed with the floor. I'll find him pressed flat against the kitchen tiles, his ear pushed so hard against the ground that his skin turns white. When I ask him what he's doing, he just whispers that he's listening to the heartbeat. He says the other one, the broken one, is getting lonely. A few nights ago, the humidity in the house became unbearable. It was thick and suffocating, the kind of heat that makes the wallpaper peel and the wood swell. The kitchen floor started to warp. The white linoleum began to bubble up in the center, right where Mark and I had collapsed all those years ago. At first, I thought it was just water damage from a leaky pipe under the sink. But when I stepped on the bulge, it didn't feel like wood or plastic. It felt soft. It felt like stepping on a piece of fruit that had gone rotten on the inside. Mark saw it too. He didn't say a word, he just went to the garage and came back with a crowbar. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with a frantic, manic energy. He started screaming at the floor, calling it a liar. He shoved the tip of the crowbar into a seam in the linoleum and pulled. The sound it made wasn't the sound of a floor coming up. It was a wet, tearing noise, like someone pulling a bandage off a deep, unhealed wound. As the floor peeled back, the smell hit us. It was a wave of pure, concentrated decay that made me gag so hard I nearly blacked out. It wasn't just rot, it was biological. It smelled like a butcher shop that had lost power in the middle of July. Mark didn't stop. He kept tearing, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps until a large section of the subfloor was exposed. Underneath the house, in the crawl space that should have been nothing but dirt and support beams, there was something else. It looked like a nest, but it wasn't made of sticks or insulation. It was made of hair, long, dark hair that looked exactly like mine. And woven into the hair were pieces of things that shouldn't exist. Small, calcified fragments that looked like tiny ribs. Bits of gray, leathery skin that were stretched tight over something that was still pulsing. "I told you," a voice said from the doorway. We both jumped. Leo was standing there, his pajamas damp with sweat. He wasn't scared. He looked disappointed, like a parent catching a child doing something stupid. He walked over to the hole in the floor and pointed down into the dark, wet mess of hair and bone. "I tried to eat all of the sadness," Leo said, his voice flat and devoid of any childhood innocence. "But there was too much. I couldn't fit it all inside me. So I had to put the rest of him back where I found him. He's been growing, Mommy. Without a soul to hold him together, he just grows." Mark dropped the crowbar. It hit the floor with a dull thud, and we both watched as the nest began to shift. Something was moving deep inside the layers of hair and rot. A small, pale hand, if you can even call it that, emerged from the mass. It had too many fingers, and they were all fused together at the knuckles. It started clawing at the edge of the broken floorboards, trying to pull itself up. It didn't have a face. It was just a knot of raw muscle and wet, translucent skin, but I could hear it. It was making a sound that I recognized from that night in the storm. It was the sound of a baby trying to draw its very first breath, but instead of air, it was sucking in the thick, foul stench of the crawl space. Mark turned and ran. I heard the front door slam, and then the sound of his car tires screaming against the driveway. He didn't come back. He hasn't answered his phone in 3 days. I think he's gone for good, and honestly, I don't blame him. But I can't leave. Because when I tried to walk toward the door, Leo grabbed my hand. His grip was impossibly strong for a 4-year-old. His skin felt feverish, burning with a heat that seemed to radiate from his very core. He looked up at me, and for a second, his eyes weren't brown anymore. They were the color of a bruised sky, flickering with a faint, electrical light. "You can't go," Leo whispered. "He needs to be fed. The sadness is all gone, Mommy. There's nothing left for him to eat. He needs something else now." I've been sitting in the living room for hours. I can hear it crawling. It's out of the floor now. I can hear the wet, sliding sound of its body moving across the kitchen tiles. Squelch, drag, squelch. It's heavy. It sounds like a bag of wet laundry being hauled across the floor. Leo is sitting in the kitchen with it. I can hear him talking to it in a low, soothing murmur. He's telling it that it's okay, that it's almost time. The worst part is that I've started to feel a strange, hollow ache in my stomach. It's the same feeling I had right before the miscarriage, a cold, heavy weight that feels like it's pulling my insides down toward the earth. My skin is starting to turn a pale, sickly gray, and no matter how many blankets I wrap myself in, I can't stop shaking. I looked in the mirror 10 minutes ago, and I saw a strand of my hair fall out. Then another. Then a whole clump. It didn't just fall, it seemed to be pulled, as if something underneath my skin was harvesting it. I know what's happening. Leo didn't just replace the baby I lost. He's a parasite, and the thing in the kitchen is his twin, the physical manifestation of everything that should have died that night. And they aren't done with me. They're using me to rebuild what was broken, piece by piece, strand by strand. The knocking has started again. But it's not coming from the door anymore. It's coming from inside my rib cage. Something is tapping on my bones, demanding to be let out. And as I sit here, watching the rain start to lash against the windows once more, I realize that the storm never really ended. We're all still on that kitchen floor, drowning in the red, waiting for the thing in the rain to decide who gets to stay and who gets to be consumed. I can hear the kitchen door creak open. Leo is leading it into the hallway. The smell is so thick now I can taste it, the taste of copper insult and old, wet hair. I'm not going to scream. I don't think I have the breath left for it. I'm just going to close my eyes and wait for the hug Leo promised me, but one that's been years in the making.
Next story.
I never thought I'd be the person posting one of these stories online, but I can't stop thinking about it. It's been weeks, and every time I look at my son, I feel this cold, sharp knot tighten in my stomach. We moved into this place because it was quiet. It's one of those older houses on the edge of town, right where the manicured lawns start to surrender to the thick, tangled brush of the state woods. It seemed perfect for a toddler, plenty of space to run, a big backyard, and that massive glass sliding door in the kitchen that lets the afternoon sun flood the floor. But the woods out there, they aren't like the woods I grew up with. They're dense. The ground is always soft, even when it hasn't rained for a while. It's that black, loamy soil that sticks to everything and smells like old, wet cedar and something slightly sweet, like fruit that's been left to rot in the sun. It started on a Wednesday. Not that the day matters, but the light was particularly gray that afternoon. My son, let's call him Leo, was playing with his wooden blocks right by the sliding door. I was at the counter, cutting up some fruit, just enjoying the silence. Suddenly, Leo stopped. He didn't drop his blocks or make a sound, he just went completely still. He was staring out through the glass into the yard, his head tilted at this weird, unnatural angle. I asked him what he was looking at, thinking maybe he'd spotted a deer or a stray cat. He didn't turn around. He just lifted a small, chubby finger and pointed toward the tree line. He asked me why the other mummy was standing out there in the dirt. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I walked over to the door and pressed my face against the glass, shielding my eyes from the glare. There was nothing. Just the gray trunks of the oaks and the shifting shadows of the ferns. I told him there wasn't anyone there, that it was just the trees playing tricks on his eyes. But Leo didn't move. He looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as profound pity. He told me that she was right there, right by the big rock where the moss grows thick. I tried to keep my voice steady. I asked him what she looked like. I expected him to say she was wearing a cape or something silly, something from a cartoon. But he didn't. He got very quiet, and his voice dropped to this low, raspy whisper that didn't sound like a 3-year-old at all. He told me she was very dirty and muddy. He said her lips were blue, like the color of the sky. Right before a storm. He told me her hair was full of dead leaves and sticks, and that she looked very tired. Then he said the part that actually made me drop the knife I was holding. He said she told him she lives under the ground now, but that she had a good boy like him once. I pulled him away from the door and locked it. I didn't care if I was being irrational. That description, the blue lips, the mud, the hair full of leaves, it didn't come from a kid's imagination. It felt like a memory. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the house turned on. I couldn't stop thinking about a local story I'd heard when we first moved in. It was one of those cold cases people only talk about in hushed tones at the grocery store. A woman had gone missing years ago. She'd been out for a run near the trailhead and just vanished. The search parties looked for months. They found her shoes near a creek, but the rest of her was gone. The rumor was always that she'd been buried somewhere in those woods, deep enough that the dogs couldn't catch the scent, but close enough to the edge that her spirit couldn't find its way out. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. I caught Leo talking to the glass door several more times. He started refusing to go into the backyard. He told me the muddy lady was getting angry because it was cold under the dirt and she wanted someone to keep her warm. He said she was waiting for him to come back down to where she was. The breaking point happened a few nights ago. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of something scraping. It wasn't a loud sound, just a rhythmic, wet sliding noise. I got out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I went to Leo's room. His bed was empty. I ran to the kitchen, and that's when I saw the sliding door. It was wide open. The humid night air was pouring into the house, smelling like stagnant water and raw earth. I looked out into the yard, and my blood turned to ice. Leo was sitting in the middle of the lawn, about 20 feet from the door. He was digging. He wasn't using a shovel. He was using his bare hands, clawing at the soft earth with a frantic, desperate energy. I ran out there, screaming his name, but he didn't even flinch. When I reached him and grabbed his shoulders, I saw his fingernails were torn and bleeding, clogged with black soil. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wide, glazed over. He told me she was right under him. He said she was. Reaching up, and he had to help her because her fingers were stuck in the roots. I pulled him back toward the house, but as I turned, I looked down at the hole he'd been digging. It wasn't deep, maybe only 6 inches, but in the pale moonlight, I saw something white poking through the dark mud. It wasn't a rock. It was smooth and curved, and as I stared at it, the dirt around it shifted. A finger, gray, bloated, and tipped with a cracked, blue nail, twitched upward through the soil. I didn't stay to see the rest. I carried Leo inside, slammed the door, and pushed the heavy kitchen table in front of it. I sat there on the floor with him until the sun came up. He fell into a deep, heavy sleep in my arms, but his hands, they stayed curled like claws, and he kept whispering in his sleep about the cold place. The police came the next morning. I told them I'd found something in the yard while gardening. They spent the entire day out there. They didn't tell me much, but I saw the way they looked at each other when they finally pulled the tarp over the site. One of the younger officers threw up behind his patrol car. They found her. They found her right where my son had been digging. She was wrapped in a plastic sheet that had long since torn, her body preserved in the oxygen-poor peat of the woods. Her lips were a permanent, frozen shade of blue. Her hair was a matted nest of oak leaves and pine needles. The worst part isn't that she's gone now. The police cleared the scene, and the body is with the coroner. The worst part is that the hole is still there. I haven't been able to bring myself to fill it in yet. Last night, I walked past the sliding door to get a glass of water. I looked out into the yard, and the moonlight was hitting the empty patch of dirt where they found her. Leo was standing in the hallway behind me. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at the dark spot in the grass. Then he leaned his head against my leg and whispered that she was mad at me. I asked him why. He said it was because I took her away before she could show him the tunnels. He told me there are so many people down there, all waiting in the dark, and that now he has to find his own way down to them. I haven't slept since. I can hear the floorboards creaking in the hallway, and every time I check on him, he's just sitting up in bed, staring at the floor. He isn't looking at me. He's looking at the wood, waiting for it to turn into dirt. I think I need to leave this house, but I'm terrified that no matter where we go, she's already told him how to get to her. He carries a handful of dirt in his pockets. He says it's so he doesn't forget the smell of home.
Next story.
I used to think that the scariest part of being a parent was the constant, high-level anxiety about whether or not your kid was going to run into the street or swallow a grape whole. You spend all your time worrying about external threats, but you never think that the person you brought into this world might be the thing that keeps you up at night. This isn't one of those stories about a ghost in the hallway or a monster under the bed. This is about something much more intimate, something buried deep inside the body. It started on a random afternoon when everything felt completely normal. I was walking down the stairs with my daughter, holding her small, warm hand in mine. She was about 3 years old then, just at that age where they start stringing together complex thoughts but still have that strange, vacant toddler stare. Suddenly, she stopped on a step and started giggling. It wasn't a normal laugh, though. It was high and dry, almost like she was watching something hilarious that I couldn't see. I asked her what was so funny, and she looked up at me with this wide, empty grin. She told me she was just remembering when she used to play with my bones when she was inside of me. I felt a cold spike go right through my chest, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I laughed it off and asked her what she meant. She leaned in close, her breath smelling like the apple juice she'd had for lunch, and said that she remembered the red room. She told me it was dark but glowing, and that everything felt heavy and wet. She started describing the sounds. She didn't use sound effects, she just used words that felt too heavy for a toddler. She complained that it was too loud in there because of the constant thumping, a deep, rhythmic beat that never stopped. She called it the drum in the wall. Then she talked about the sloshing sound. She said it felt like being underwater in a warm bathtub that you couldn't get out of. But then she went back to the bones. She told me that her favorite thing to do was to reach out and grab the hard parts. She described my ribs from the inside, saying they felt like smooth, cold pipes that she would rattle whenever she got bored. She said she liked the way my spine felt against her back, like a jagged mountain range that she could lean on. The way she described the internal geography of my own body made me feel physically sick. It wasn't just imagination. She described the way the light looked through the skin, a dull, sickly, orange-red glow that never went away. The thing that really broke me, though, was when she mentioned the foomp. That was her word for it. She said she remembered the moment everything changed. She told me about a bright, blinding light that hurt her eyes, and then a loud foomp against her skin. She said a man with a mask hit her and made her take her first breath, and that it felt like swallowing fire. I had never told her about her birth. I had never mentioned that she didn't breathe when she first came out. The doctor had to be aggressive to get her lungs to clear. He had slapped her back quite hard to get that first cry out of her. I hadn't even told my own mother that detail because it felt too traumatic to revisit. But there she was, standing on the stairs, describing the physical sensation of a medical emergency that happened before she even had a name. After that day, the house felt different. I started noticing things I hadn't before. My daughter would sit on the floor and just stare at my midsection. Sometimes, when we were cuddling on the couch, I'd feel her small fingers tracing the line of my lower ribs. She wasn't just touching me, she was feeling for the placement of the bone. She would whisper to herself about how they felt different now that there was skin in the way. She seemed disappointed that she couldn't get a good grip on them anymore. I started having these horrible, visceral dreams. I would dream that I was hollowed out, that my insides were just a playground for something that didn't belong there. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, feeling phantom pains in my abdomen, right where she said she used to kick and pull. It felt like my body wasn't entirely mine, like I was just a vessel that had been used and discarded, but the passenger was still lingering, trying to find a way back in. One night, I woke up because I felt a weight on my chest. It wasn't the typical sleep paralysis thing. It was real. I opened my eyes and saw her. My daughter was sitting on my stomach, her knees tucked under her, staring down at me in the dark. The moonlight from the window hit her eyes, making them look like two black glass marbles. She was pressing her hands down hard into my soft tissue, right below my sternum. I asked her what she was doing. My voice was shaking so hard I could barely get the words out. She didn't move. She just leaned down until her face was inches from mine and whispered that she could still hear it. She said the drum was still beating, but it was slower now. She told me that she missed the red room, she missed the warmth and the sloshing and the feeling of my bones against her skin. Then she said something that has haunted me every single second since. She told me that she was trying to find the door. She said she remembered where the walls were thin, and that if she pushed hard enough, she could maybe get back inside. She started digging her small, sharp fingernails into my skin, trying to find a seam. It wasn't an attack, it was more like she was trying to unwrap a gift. She was so calm about it, so casual. I had to pull her off me and put her back in our room, locking the door for the first time in our life. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the floor of the hallway, clutching a kitchen knife and crying. I felt like a monster for being afraid of my own child, but the way she looked at me wasn't the way a daughter looks at a mother. It was the way a predator looks at a cage they've been locked out of. Since then, the atmosphere in our home has become thick and suffocating. She doesn't talk about the bones as much anymore, but she watches me. When I'm cooking or cleaning, I'll turn around and find her standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on my torso. Sometimes I catch her talking to the air, describing the other things that were in the red room with her. She says there were bits of hair and teeth that didn't belong to her, things that I must have absorbed or forgotten about. I've started getting these strange bruises. They appear in clusters around my ribs and my hips, deep, purple marks that look like the imprints of tiny hands. My doctor can't explain them. He says it might be an iron deficiency or stress, but I know what it is. I can feel the pressure every night, even when she's locked in her room. It feels like something is pushing from the outside in, and something else is pushing from the inside out. The worst part is the realization that she knows me better than I know myself. She has seen the parts of me that no one is ever supposed to see. She has touched my internal organs with her bare hands. To her, I'm not a person. I'm just a room. A fleshy, pulsing room that she's grown too big for, but still wants to occupy. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. Every time she giggles, I wonder what she's remembering. Every time she hugs me, I wonder if she's measuring the distance between my ribs. I've started wearing heavy sweaters, even in the heat, just to put more layers between her and my skeleton. But it doesn't matter. I can still feel her eyes on me, tracing the lines of my spine, waiting for the walls to get thin enough again. I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and she won't be in our bed, and I won't have to look far to find her.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.